Hello, welcome back to another episode of Somewhere Between a Film and TV podcast. I am your host, Daniel Parra. And number one, thank you so much for listening and watching. Number two, if you could please, down below, like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. Tell me, what did you think of The Roses, directed by Jay Roach? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. As for me, let's go ahead and get started on this. This is The Roses, directed by Jay Roach, which follows Olivia-Colman and Benedict-Cumberbatch as they navigate a kind of strained marriage after an incident happens with Benedict-Cumberbatch and this building he was working on, and then all the events that transpire. It's a comedy, but I still don't want to fully get into spoilers until I say this. Everything we review here will always have full spoilers. So if you don't even want to know some of the stuff, let's say the jokes even that are in this, go ahead and just leave the like and subscribe and get out of here and then come back to it. Otherwise, everyone else, let's get started with this movie. I like Jay Roach a lot in terms of directing. I like the Meet the Parents movies a lot. Meet the Parents and the second one, Meet the Fockers. I enjoy that. The third one, Little Fockers, I think I saw it in theaters when I was a kid, but I don't remember it all too well. But with this one, I remember the trailer kind of catching my eye because I like Olivia-Colman a lot. I like Benedict-Cumberbatch a lot. And while he's able to sometimes kind of get into his comedic ability, he's not necessarily always been a comedic actor at the forefront of everything. He was in Zoolander 2, which I don't think is very good. He was in Doctor Strange, of course. He's able to use some of his comedic talents, but not necessarily play up the comedic role entirely. It's part of the character, but not fully what the character is. Same goes for Sherlock, which is a show that I grew up loving and obsessed with, and I liked him a whole lot in it. But here he gets to really stretch the comedic abilities that he does have, along with a pretty extensively talented cast like Andy Samberg, my boy forever. Love him so much. He's great in this. As a matter of fact, interestingly, kind of more neutral than I would anticipate that a character that he could play would be. He's not, the stealing the attention away, which is kind of funny because I feel like his counterpart Kate McKinnon sort of is a little bit. But I thought she was utilized well in this. I know that Kate McKinnon is sometimes a kind of character, comedian, actress that some movies feel like they don't necessarily know what to do with her, but here I felt like she was well utilized, and she does sort of walk that line of sometimes being used as a crutch for comedy, even if the comedy or the jokes themselves don't work. But here it works. It works. It's good. And overall with this, I'm going to say this. Did I love it? Did I hate it? Or am I somewhere between on it? I didn't love it, but I liked it a lot. So I'm going to say somewhere between on it for sure. There's a lot to like about it. I laughed out loud a few times, but then I also think that at the same time, there's a few separate issues that are within it that I do have. So let's go ahead and get into it. The positives are Olivia-Colman and Benedict-Cumberbatch are believable as people that met with chemistry. I like that this movie is sort of thematically about long-term relationships and also the idea of maybe just a fight that got out of hand. And honestly, it's kind of hard to come at this with like the sort of critiques that I do have of it because yet again, I'm going to visit a well of constructive criticism that I have is trailers are so annoying sometimes because the trailers for this sold it as, and maybe my fault for not knowing about the one with Danny DeVito and Michael Douglas beforehand. I saw they played the clip from that one, The War of the Roses, or the book, but the trailer shows the entire escalation of what the movie is as the entire movie. So then you spend the entire movie like, okay, their marriage is growing apart. They're growing apart. They're not really seeing eye to eye on things. And you're sort of like, okay, so when does all the like crazy divorce type stuff come in? And then it's the third act of the movie, arguably, but the trailer sells it as that's the entire movie. And so going into it, I was like, man, this movie's paced weird. I was like, I guess it's kind of really either really fast or really slow, because we haven't even gotten to any of this stuff yet. And it ended up being just sort of like tricking me into not being fully prepared for what the movie was overall going to be. It is very much an escalation of events. Funny enough, the last time I had an issue with this was that movie Neighbors with Seth Rogen and Zac Efron that I mentioned on my review for the studio. And I remember the trailer for that also gave away their escalation, the jokes, the pranks that they kept pulling off of on each other. So walking into this one, I was like, okay, walking out of it, I was not let down, but I was sort of like, okay, let me reassess. The movie that I just saw was different than the one that I was anticipating or necessarily kind of wanting in a specific kind of way. So I was like, all right, well, let's reevaluate this. And maybe this has happened to you too, where you're like, okay, let me go ahead and think about the movie that I actually watched and the one that I wanted to see. Overall, I still think that this is a good movie. I think it's very funny. And I think, though, that I still have some of the same critiques by way of some of the points it's trying to make. Because I thought this walking out of it, and I do think that this is true, it felt like British humor executed by an American director, because I do think that the screenwriter for this is British, I believe, and Jay Roach is obviously more American sensibility in terms of comedy. And that was one of those things where I was kind of like, okay, it feels like it, and that's part of why there feels to be some sort of tonal dissonance sometimes, because while it is very funny, sometimes it does have a bit more of that kind of like more accessible studio comedy, and then other times it feels a lot more like that black comedy type of joke, because I thought that honestly going into it, I thought it was going to be much more of a black comedy. I thought that it was going to be a lot more just darker in tone, I suppose, than it sometimes is, but then it does go there. But then when it goes there, it feels really kind of awkward and a little bit shifty in terms of balancing tone, because the scene that I like a lot where they finally have built the house that Benedict-Cumberbatch's character had been wanting to build after she promises it as kind of like a compensation thing for taking care of their kids for so long, just solo and by himself, that he builds this house. And it creates this really awkward, intense dinner table scene that I liked a lot, where they're saying all these things to each other, and the comedy there is derived from this really awkward situation, and the friends are present to see it too, but then they also kind of like want to echo it because they can't tell the type of barbs they're throwing back at each other. And then that feels like the movie that I was anticipating this was going to be. And then it'll kind of have other jokes that are a lot more in line with the more, I wouldn't want to say Meet the Parents, because Meet the Parents does have some stuff that is very much also kind of like the thing that I just mentioned, but maybe a little bit less. I don't want to say the word subtle either. Maybe we will go with subtle, though. A little less subtle in terms of the screenplay, because I do think that's the strongest thing here. Is I think that this is a really well written movie in terms of dialogue and in terms of how they interact with each other, because I noticed that there is sort of a vocal sort of cadence that they have with each other in terms of their dialogue and in terms of how they interact and exchange words. I thought that Benedict Cumberbatch and Olivia-Colman specifically, maybe it's because of, the way they speak, but they have a very specific sort of sounds when they're going back and forth in their dialogue. It feels very energetic, like a play's dialogue, sort of, much less in terms of the slapstick type of stuff that we might expect from a comedy that would be of this caliber, and something more along the lines of maybe something that is trying to be wittier. But that's the thing, is I feel like this has two good movies in it that it's not even trying to balance tone, it's trying to balance its comedic styles, and I feel like there's two different ones at play here, and they're both funny, but then they're also both kind of fighting for the spotlight a little bit. I feel like I don't want it to come across as I'm trying to review the movie that I wanted and not the one that I got. The one that I got, I do like a lot, but I feel like this movie itself has this internal conflict, ironically enough, of two different sort of comedic sensibilities fighting for the screen at the same time. And it's not tonal whiplash so much as it is a kind of whiplash of, so what are we looking for? What are we trying to do here? Because the overall point underscored at the end, spoilers like I said for this, that I think that the entire movie is now tinged with this like black comedy punchline where they say till death do us part. And earlier on, of course, an argument that they had that got really physical led to their own demise, essentially, where they bust the stove that they say is really sensitive that Olivia-Colman really wanted, and they say till death do us part, and we see the gas stove throughout the house leaking. I believe that's how you say that. And then that's when they say that, and then the movie ends. And that's the punchline there. It's very funny, it's very grim, it's very dark. But then earlier on, I was kind of wondering, though, since all of this is happening, I do like that the movie's message is kind of murkier than I guess you would think it would be. I like that there's this idea that these characters don't want to be alone. I think that there's something to be said there in terms of what the movie's going for a little bit thematically, in terms of some just the funny parts that are obvious about couple arguments and about are kind of seeking each other out. It's thematically a little bit tied together with Together, funny enough. And what I ended up appreciating about this so much is that I liked that for a studio comedy, for it to have a kind of point like that's not completely obvious is pretty cool. And I just think that making that the punchline at the end feels a little bit thematically kind of strange in terms of being off about how I feel about the rest of it, just in terms of earlier on, a lot of the comedy stems more from things that feel more like Adam Sandler or something like that, where these kids are super strange and they want to like be doing all these athletic things together. And I mean, the jokes are funny. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think that the joke there works pretty well, but it just feels kind of off kilter from the rest of it. And then it sort of makes it feel like the tones really don't balance out with each other. But then I end up liking both halves of a whole. It's just the stitching of them together is the primary issue that this movie has. It's weird to have a lot of good stuff in it, but then be kind of brought down a little bit by the pacing of itself, of all things. And what I really liked a lot about this, outside of Olivia-Colman and Benedict-Cumberbatch, is Kate McKinnon, and I liked Andy Samberg in this a lot. It's funny the types of character that they're playing, because Kate McKinnon loves to do that specific kind of character, and Andy Samberg I thought was interesting because he plays this kind of lawyer, but he's sort of playing himself down, because I know his comedic sensibilities, because I love Andy Samberg. I love him from Lonely Island. I've mentioned this before, that Lonely Island is like one of my favorite things ever, like hugely formative to my sense of humor. And him being kind of scaled back here is really interesting to me. Like, I feel like a bit more of the maybe studio comedy version of this, where the dialogue is a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say lessened, but a little bit different. Andy Samberg would be in the main part of this. And I could see a world in which that works, where the escalation of fighting turns more physical in terms of anything else. And overall, I just thought that the movie was kind of like thematically confused a little bit, but it's also an enjoyable time, because maybe it's not necessarily looking to say anything deeper, but I did kind of feel like it was. And I felt like just because something's a studio comedy doesn't mean that it doesn't not want to say something, you know? You should give it that chance, give it that opportunity. And a lot of the points about long-term relationships and in terms of how people navigate that, there's an interesting conversation that's had where that this escalates in the first place, where Benedict-Cumberbatch is like, I don't know, I guess I kind of hate you sometimes. It's like wild, and it's a crazy thing to say. But I wanted to see more of where that was going. A lot of the arguments here that they start are really fascinating, but then they get really kind of cut off, either by, ironically enough, the movie itself, they say that they don't apologize to each other enough, but then I feel like they both kind of go back on their words like way too fast, and I kind of wanted to see a more natural progression of where we get all the way to the point where she starts shooting the gun around the house, and they're all like kind of like physically like Tom and Jerrying each other, and it was really interesting. I just kind of wanted to see more of it from the standpoint of the dialogue they were writing as well. It's more of I enjoyed this movie. I thought a couple of scenes were like laugh out loud funny, but then at the same time, I'm also kind of like, but if you just would have given me a little more of what you were wanting to say, what you were trying to say, like it was that close. It was that close to like saying something really interesting to me. And for whatever reason, cuts itself off in it. And I kind of wanted to see more of what they were talking about with the divorce stuff. I thought it was interesting where they're in the meeting where the lawyers are interacting, and this is kind of just like their day, and then they're not really taking it like anything all that serious, and they're like, you should really just reconsider. But to these two, this is kind of like everything for them, because we see the escalation of their marriage from the beginning, where everything is great, and we can see that he is genuinely kind of this person that I like, that both of them are sort of flawed, and I like that Benedict Cumberbatch is self-acknowledging of the fact that like in some cases he is selfish about what he does and that he's very needy. I liked that they were willing to state that about themselves as well, and then also try and tie into more of that. But then it made me miss a more natural progression of the events here escalating into the final second, like the second half of this. And overall, it's a funny like thing to critique, because did I enjoy this movie overall? Yes, I did. Did I think it was funny? Yeah, absolutely. But, and as far as studio comedies go, that's what you want, right? That's what you want to say. But then part of me is also like, well, man, I wish that the other stuff, the thematic stuff about making sort of an escalating event of tragedy into a comedy of a sort was even more expanded on. And I didn't get that part of it. It had some interesting things to say, and then didn't take them anywhere. It was more like hinting at it, touching on the idea of what do you do when you handle, let's say that one of them is the breadwinner for a while, and then all of a sudden this like freak accident happens, or there's like, so whenever they have to trade places essentially, and the argument of having kids and who takes care of them and who's valid for doing what parts of what, and the idea of co-parenting and the differences between the two. One of the things that I think is hilarious is that he starts to make them these like athletic freaks, and they like get really strange and really weird and really obsessed with it about developing a contract. And there's this ongoing bit about that I think is funny. And overall, though, they say, he's like, this is their dream. And then Olivia-Colman says, well, is it though? And that's never touched on again. I wanted to know more about that. I know that the kids end up kind of being this like fodder for just comedic relief, where they're like, oh, we're getting a divorce. And then the kids are like, oh, finally. And now you think about like, I guess they died. What are those kids going to do? But overall, yes, those were my negatives, and the positives are still there though. The positives are that I think it's still very well written and very funny. And Olivia-Colman and Benedict Cumberbatch are great in it. So are Andy Samberg and Kate McKinnon. But then I just have the negatives of while the writing is good, I feel like I'm missing the rest of something. Something's not here that I'm wanting. And overall, though, I did enjoy this. I enjoyed the roses, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a score now. I feel like I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. I thought this was good. I thought that this was a solid, good time. It's funny, and do I recommend it? Yeah, for sure. I think that it's a good time, and you could watch it and laugh out loud. I feel like I did like 3 or 4 times. So, hey, not for nothing. And it's not bad. I would say that's about it, though. I did enjoy this. What did you think of The Roses? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. Up next, though, is a review for Darren Aronofsky's Caught Stealing. Super excited for that. Let's wait for it. Let's see what we think of it. I'm very excited to talk about that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening and watching again just one more time. What did you think of The Roses? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. And until next time.